Hello, I'm Hickey from interest.co.nz and welcome to a special report brought to you in association with ASB. Special today because I'm going to be talking about an obscure economic concept. And if it sounds too much like an Economics 101 lecture, just turn me off. What I want to talk about today though is the paradox of thrift, and I'll try and explain what it means. The paradox of thrift is something that's been talked about for a long time and referred particularly to an experience that was seen during the Depression of the 1930s, and so it's worth looking at that now. Back then, the theory was that when people felt that times were tough, they didn't spend their money. And this was a problem because when they didn't spend their money, let's say on going to the dentist or buying a new set of crockery, that money then didn't go to the people who were doing the dentistry or selling the crockery or the manufacture of the crockery, and eventually that person was laid off. And it became a vicious cycle where money wasn't spent, employees didn't work, they were laid off, they spent less, and around you go. And that was the theory about what went wrong during the Great Depression. But it's worth having a look at this because a lot of people are now saying the same thing. We need to keep pumping money into the economy through tax giveaways, through checks given to people, through anything that will keep them consuming. This is the great seductive argument, and it does seem quite true on the face of it. But let's have a deeper look, because frankly, it's wrong. The paradox of thrift is wrong. Firstly, if someone decides not to spend, typically what they do is put that money in the bank. And as long as the bank is still lending that money, they can lend on to someone else who will spend it or more in a better way, invest it. So the real problem is not one of not spending, the problem is one of hoarding, perhaps by a bank or by someone who didn't put their actual cash in the bank. And this was a problem during the Depression where people put their money under the mattress because they didn't trust the banks. The real issue with the paradox of thrift is not saving, it's actually not lending from the banks. Also, there's this other idea that we need to keep consuming to keep GDP growing. Well, when you look at the stats, particularly in the States, and they're the kings of consumption, they've seen an increase in consumption as a percentage of GDP over the last 10 years or so, which has been startlingly fast. It's gone from 67% of GDP to 71% of GDP in the last 9 years. And that may not seem a lot, but it took 30 years for the previous growth of that type to get through the economy. And what's actually happened? Well, US GDP growth has actually fallen. And that's because Americans, frankly, were spending too much. They weren't investing enough. Now they have too much debt and they're in all sorts of grief. The big lesson out of this, of course, I think, is that to solve this problem, we don't need to throw more money at it. We simply need to save more, invest more to improve our productivity so we can reduce our debt. And that means no government giveaways, no free checks, because they never are, they simply store up debt for the future. And we need to avoid the issue of people being given money for, frankly, nothing. I'm Hickey with a bit of a rant on an economic concept called the paradox of thrift. Hope you're still with me. That was brought to you in association with ASB.